tell you a little about the framework that this book is, that I've used the book in. There's a rabbi, I don't know if you know of a Rabbi Davis in, I believe it's Mountaindale. Anyway, he introduced Rabbi Goldstein, who I learned with, to 4 basic svarim. These svarim are about the process of learning. Now, if something that I say is not clear, just interrupt, okay? The process of learning means the following. We have what's called a food processor, right? So you can slice all different vegetables you want, and you can. The idea of a food processor is that it does certain functions, and with those functions you're able to cook. So when it comes to the learning process, there's a series of functions that the Gemara does when it analyzes any text. There's a group of books that were written that describe that process, the learning process. The Ramchal wrote 3 of them, and Reb Yitzhak Kampenton, who is the rabbi of Reb Yosef Kairo's rabbi, wrote another one. The 3 of the Ramchal are called Derek Tfunos, Sefer Higayon, and Sefer Melitza. The book we're going to be concentrating on, the first book is the Sefer Derek Tfunos, and that will give us an overview of the learning process. Then he goes deeper into the analytic process with Sefer Higayon, Book of Logic, and then he discusses a very important related topic to learning, which is rhetoric, which is how language is used in order to motivate, which is a whole separate topic from the logical aspect, but it's all involved in the learning process. Now, on the other side of the scale, you have Reb Yitzhak Kampenton, who's less abstract and more involved in the actual learning process. Okay, I'll be speaking about these books more as we get involved in the course, but we are going to be concentrating on Derek Tfunos. I'd like to show you my screen. This is, have you seen my screen?
I can see your screen. I see the pretty flowers, but I see our word is just coming up. Okay.
Okay, now I'm going to put this down here. I guess you can minimize it.
Welcome.
Yeah. Just whoever's listening whoever's not in front of a computer, I'm recording all these screens. I'll be able to distribute it to you. You'll be able to watch it on your computer with Windows Media Player. Whoever wants to watch it again.
Avi, how do I get on? I go to that link you sent me?
Go to that link I sent you, and then you'll have to download a little applet. You have to put in your email address and your name. It doesn't matter. You just put anything in. Then it will download a small little plug-in, and then you should be on.
Okay.
It will take about 30 or 40 seconds to download it.
Okay. What you have in front of us is the beginning of the Gemara and Baba Kama, which I suppose most people who are learning at some point in their learning career studied. But what I do with the Gemara is I take a digital version of it and I use an outline process to show the give and take, the Shakta B'Tar of the Gemara. So for instance, this Gemara of Baba Kama, it starts off as Arbavas Nezikin, okay, and then it describes the Arbavos, the shore, the border. It goes on to tell us between these avos that the shore is not like the mava, like the shore, and that the shore and the mava not like the aish, and all 3 of them. That's the Mishnah. It has 3 parts. What I also would like to do with you, which I'm not going to do now because I don't have the ability to do it, is what's called a collapsible outline, which means these 3 sections can be collapsed, and then we could just say that really the Mishnah describes the 4 avos and tells us their differences, their distinctions from each other, and their common qualities. Okay. The Gemara then begins to analyze this Mishnah. Now, I'm not going to get involved in all the details, but I just want to show you a very important aspect we are not aware of, and that's the very strict formal design of the Gemara, to use that term. I just had a guest on my Shabbos table, and he, like many other people, are not aware that the Gemara is set up in a very strict formal fashion, and things follow in a very strictly formal fashion. So if you look at this Gemara, the first thing the Gemara does is says that since we're talking about avos, principal categories, there must be toldos. That's the first question it asks. Excuse me, it's the diuk, an inference that it makes. On that inference, once we know there must be toldos, the Gemara asks, are the toldos like the avos or not like the? It brings two examples, one in Shabbos, where the toldos are like the avos, and one in Tumah, where the toldos are not like the avos. And it asks us, in our case of Nezikin, what is the rule? Are they like the avos or not? If you notice what basically I've tried to, besides visually formatting the Gemara, I have three basic colors that I'm using. Black, which is not a color at all, which is the original text. Greens, we'll see, are questions. Reds are questions, and greens are answers. And we'll get involved in Derek Tefunos in a much more detailed analysis of what type of questions are questions, I mean, different types of questions, and what type of answers are answers, and how we understand the Shakar Torah. But I just wanted to show you visually this Gemara. The Gemara, after it asks the question of are the toldos like the avos or not, then it proceeds to give an answer in green. Papa answers, what is that? Some of them are like the avos and some of them are not. The Gemara then goes through all the six avos with an answer telling us Manolan, where the av is in the Chumash, defining the toldos, in this case Karen, and finally determining whether the avos are like the toldos or not. In this case Karen, they are like the toldos. Then it goes to the next av, Shein and Rego. It defines again where they are in the Chumash. It then asks us if the toldos, what are the toldos? And finally, it determines that the toldos are like the avos. And it goes through that process until it gets to Regel again, and shows us that really the only one that's not like the av is Chetzi Nezik Sroros. So here you have what I call visual logic. What I do with these three colors is just to identify what the original statement is, what the questions are, and what the answers are. And whenever there's a question on the question, so that I indented one. Okay, that forms a visual view of the Gemara, which makes it very easy to follow when you're giving a class or when you're learning. Now that we've seen just an overview, of course, not at all, but just as an overview, that there's a very formal structure going on in the Gemara, it would be very helpful to understand what the various moves in the Gemara are. And that's where Derek Tefunos comes in. Derek Tefunos is the Ramchal analyzes the process of learning in the Gemara, and then he categorizes it for us. So now I'm going to show you another, the chart that you may have in the book. I don't know if you own the book. I'd probably make a few pennies if you bought it. I'm joking around.
I haven't bought the book. That's how I got in touch with you. This is Avi, yeah. I have the chart. It's a very nice chart. It's a big chart.
Wow.
Okay, it's a chart and it has a lot of sections to it, and I'm going to just explain some basic sections just to give us a orientation of what we're going to be doing in the book, what the Ramchal has accomplished in this Sefer, and then as we go into the various details, we'll be able to see clearly again, mapped out in front of us exactly where we're holding. Okay, is everybody? I heard a lot of bells and things. Everybody's on? Is that okay?
Yeah, I think.
Okay, great. Again, questions you can just pop them out. Just speak if you can speak.
Can I just a logistic, Yankee Horowitz from Muncie. Just a logistical question. Can I make this larger? I have your screen, but is there a way for me to I can't get into what you're doing, right?
What do you mean? You should be able to see my screen and make my screen as large as I guess full
No,
screen
but
mode.
I think Yankee wants to zoom in on the,
you mean zoom?
the chart.
You want to zoom in?
I mean, no, there's no. I don't think there's any way to do it unless you have the actual file.
Let me see 1 second. No, yes, I can. On the bottom right corner, if anybody wants to, you see on the bottom right corner, it says 88 or something. I got mine on 150, I can see it much more clearly.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying, guys? You can.
Okay, we're going to have to get all this technical stuff together as we go along. Right now what I do is I have the whole chart in front of me, and I'm using the Hebrew one because it's impossible to switch the English and the Hebrew, but I'll just try to give you an overview of what's going on here. You probably can't see the individual words yet, but I'm going to zoom into the parts when we have to. It's a PDF file. And those of you that have the book in front of you, you can use the chart in the book, or you can look on the screen. I guess the best way is to look on the screen. I'll try to zoom in to the proper areas I'm going to talk about. Okay, the Ramchal is going to give us an overview, rather in-depth overview, remarkable overview of the process of learning. He identifies in this process of learning two basic areas that we're going to have to discuss. One, and I'm going to make a little red over here. I don't know if you can see me in real time there, Avi?
Yes, you can see it in real time.
Fantastic. Okay, what he's going to do is he's going to talk about the structure of language itself. Now I'm going to zoom out for a second. I'm going to leave it, just intellectually, verbally. We have what's called the thought-word-thought formula. Okay, what does that mean? You have a thought in your mind, you clothe it in words, another person listens to those words, and he has to reconstruct the thought that you had, correct? That's what communication is all about. Kodesh Baruch Hu does the same thing. He has his idea about what the world should be doing. He enwraps that idea in the words of the Chumash. He gives us a Torah Shabbat Peh, and with that Torah Shabbat Peh, we unlock his message. Okay, so you don't need Nevi'us anymore. That area is not for us. It's gone a long time ago. But if you want to know what Kodesh Baruch Hu wants to do, what you have to do is to understand his text. So we have to understand how words work in order to communicate ideas. And when we understand that, we'll be able to more carefully read and decipher what Kodesh Baruch Hu wants us to do. That's the whole point here. So language, he divides the process into the technical aspects of language, which is what I just made this red mark here, where you have to understand how statements are built, what different packages they come in. A statement could be a simple statement. It could be a statement, an if-then statement, a lefikach statement. He has 11 different types of statements he's going to describe, but you have to understand how to build statements. That's process one. process is, after you've understood a statement, it says you have to add a statement to another statement. That's called a hekesh. Okay, a hekesh means that I say all men have legs. That's one statement that says Reuven is a man, and then I put it together and I say, wow, Reuven has legs. Or anyone that does an Av Malach of Shabbos is Chayav Skila. Kesiva is an Av Malach of Shabbos. Therefore, Kesiva has a Chiv of Skila. That's a simple hekesh. You take two statements, you glue them together, and you produce a third one. So that's the second process that he's going to be talking about, all the different ways to put statements together and create children. Technical side. That's the technical side of how language works and how you build statements and how you create syllogisms. Syllogisms means hekesh. The second very important part is called shakla or give and take. How do you prove a statement is true or not? What tools do you have? So here, in this part of the book, he's going to tell us what is the basis upon, what is the basis of truth of a statement. For instance, you can say a statement is true because it, what he calls the Raya Mitzad Teva. How do I know that the sun comes up in the east? Because my eyes tell me that. How do I know 2 and 2 is 4? Because elect forces that has to be reality. So how do I know that I should not work on Shabbos? That's because the Chumash said so. Okay, so we have to define, the Ramchal does us a great favor, and he defines the various sources of proof. What's called evidence, what's called acceptable evidence upon which you say that a statement is true. And the second part is what's called acceptable evidence upon which you can prove a statement is false. Okay, so the second part of this book will be talking about evidence, proofs, rayas. What's called a legitimate raya and what's called a legitimate, not a legitimate raya, and how can you prove and disprove statements. Okay?
That's really most of learning. Most of a Gemara is there's a statement, there's a kasha. The kasha is proving the statement. The Teretz is saying why the kasha is not a kasha and the statement is true. Right? Is that really the good part of the Gemara?
The process of the Gemara is using these elements, as you said, to bring a statement, to raise a kasha, to give a teretz, to raise a kasha on the teretz. These are the basic building blocks of the Gemara itself. Okay, but to understand those building blocks, you have to be very clear about how statements work. Okay, there's a lot of technical information that you have to know to make sure that you're understanding a statement quality. If it says, Kol Yisrael Yeshnam Chelek Olam Haba, okay, what would you say someone who is not in Klal Yisrael? Does he have a Chelek Olam Haba or not? You have to know how statements work, if that's mukhrach or not mukhrach. Is that just a possibility or does it has to be? Okay? Those type of technical aspects of how statements work is the basis of all the Shakavatari of the Gemara, and he's going to explain that to us, okay? So we're going to learn about the formal way that statements work and how we use the debating process, the Shakavatari and the Gemara, and we're going to have to also discuss on what basis is something called true or not, what's called proof. Okay, those are those 3 parts. Okay, this is the part here, which is called Chelkei HaSugiyos, which is what you were talking about, statements, shelas, tshuvas. Over here in the last part of the book, he's going to talk about what he calls havchanot. That means how can you distinguish different subjects from each other? And as we go into the introduction today, that will understand why that's a very important process in the book. Okay? That's just a general overview. Yes, please.
Excuse me? A quick second. Yeah. It's Yankee Harris. Are you moving the screen or is it on the original screen?
I just moved it over slightly. It messed you up when you, I understand. Okay, I'm going to come off the screen, okay? I'm going to come off the screen. It was that's just a general orientation that I wanted to give you. And I'm going to go to now the text itself, okay? So it's going to be a little bit flipping around until we get to the text, but we'll get there eventually. Okay. Let me just close this. And close that. And open up Derek Tfunos, okay? Let me open up Derek Tfunos. 1 second. There we go. Okay, in a few seconds, it'll be on my screen, and then hopefully it'll be on yours. Okay, this is a digital version of the text of the book. We did a lot of work on the formatting when we published the book, but it's much easier for me to indicate things I want to indicate here than having the scan. Okay, let's start with the Ramchal. He starts by saying that Chemdas Yediyas Ha'emes hu inyan tivi el hanefesh hasichlis hazos asher banu ad shelo yimotze adam briya b'sechlo shelo yitametz v'yishtadel kafi kol chaseichel shebo legalot ota בעניינים שהזדמן לו ולהשקיף עליהם ולדחוס השקר לרחוקו. Okay, I'm going to translate that.
Just anybody, there are a few people who are not following on the screen, so I just want to tell them you started from the Hakdama of the beginning of the Sefer. That's so that you just read the first paragraph, just to get everybody up to where we're up to.
Fantastic. Okay. The first idea here is that the desirability, the knowledge of truth is something that's actually built in together in the nefesh hasichlis that we have. What is the nefesh hasichlis? Each human being has a part of his reality, of his persona, his being, which can do a process that no other animal or creation can do, which is to think. It's called the nefesh hasichlis. And that nefesh hasichlis that we have naturally desires truth. And it also naturally rejects sheker. And that's a very, very important beginning point. What does it have to do with us learning? In the learning process, it's very important to realize that you have to give yourself the permission to say, is this statement true or false? That doesn't mean do I believe in Torah or I don't believe in Torah. Does it make sense or does it not make sense? That's something that your mind and every individual's mind has to do when it confronts any statement in the Chumash or any statement in the Torah. If it doesn't make sense, so we're going to have to understand, as it says in the Chumash, in Rek Hem Chem Hem. If it doesn't make sense, then we're not getting the point. So we have to now investigate what we missed. And we can do that with all the books that we have online and offline and all the libraries in the world. But it's very important to know the first thing is that there is an inherent desire for truth in every human being, and it's something that should not be overlooked when you're learning. Say to yourself, does this make sense or not? Is it true or not? Don't just accept everything. Pesi yamin b'kol davar. A fool believes, a simpleton believes in everything. You have to give yourself the permission to say, is what's being said here logical or not logical? Is it reasonable or not reasonable? And that, if you let yourself go and do that, will propel you into being very interested about learning. And a lot of people, not a lot, let's say whoever, there are people who never let them give themselves permission. They just memorize what they're learning, like memorizing the numbers in a telephone book. And then they don't understand why they are not getting the joy of learning. So it's a very important step, The first important step is to realize that you have a natural, inherent understanding, a desire to find truth, and stay away from shame. So that's the first thing that Ramchal says, okay? And he says that every healthy person has it, and therefore every healthy person always strives to find the truth in whatever he finds before him. If you're listening to someone, if you're reading something, automatically say, hey, well, that doesn't sound right, or that does sound right. Now he brings up a problem. If truth was apparent in everything that we saw, if truth was readily apparent in everything that we viewed, and we had this desire to know truth, then all we'd have to do is casually observe reality, and what would happen? When we would increase our observations, it would become a simple formula. You would just observe, and immediately you would gain wisdom. Okay? By the way, I always tell people we're called observant Jews. The beginning of learning is observation. You must observe. Okay? You have to observe what you're learning, listen to what you're learning, and then we're going to have to learn how to evaluate whether those things are true or not. But anyway, if the world was very simple, then all we would have to do was observe things, and immediately we would get to chap. We'd understand it immediately. And we become wise instantly. What's the truth, however? This doesn't work as simply as we would like it to be. Lo mitzad amusag v'lo mitzad hamasig. That means there's certain problems with what we observe, and there's certain problems that we have as observers that make wisdom something that is a little more complicated than simple observation. Why is that true? Ki hine be'emet ein lecha nimsa shelo tiyena bo bechinot rabot kulan amitiyim. The reality is whatever you observe has many different aspects to it. And each one of those myriad of aspects are all true. So you get what's called information overload. You have all these different aspects to look at something. Now, how do I handle that? Mehem me'atzmo umehem michutz mimenu. Some of these aspects are internal, and some of them are relational. He'll explain in 1 second. Derech mashal. I'm looking at a simple thing called the tzura of a shulchan. The actual physical form. It's a flat table. It has 4 legs. Midat, its measurement, length and width. Ukiyot tzivo, all the physical aspects. Hem bechinat b'shulchan atzmo. When I'm talking about those aspects, its length, its width, its color, its material, those are all internal aspects in the table itself. Hem bechinas b'shulchan atzmo itself. Tashmisho, its use, however, or its shavyo, its worth, or its zman asiyato, or the time that was actually created, hem bechinas chutz mimeno. Those are aspects that are not talking about the table itself, but the table in relationship to something else. For instance, what do I use the table for? That means that I'm not talking about the table itself. I'm sure talking about the table in relationship to putting objects upon it. Okay, that's its tashmir. Or I say, well, what's its value? So that's not the table itself. That's its relationship to the shuk, the monetary aspect, which is an external thing. How much it's worth in the shuk. Okay, so we're going to have to know that there are many aspects that we're going to have to investigate when we investigate any subject. We're going to have to understand that some of them are internal and some of them are relational or external. Okay, he's going to try to give us a handle on this, by the way. That's why he wrote the book. We'll find out in 1 second. He's going to try to organize a system that will be able to have a checklist of all these different aspects of things and in a more systematic way approach logically a subject and try to find the truth out of it. Okay, so that's one problem, that there's many, many different aspects to any subject we have, and they all are true, and we have to get some sort of handle on how to start defining things. We have another problem. Lo kol habechinos mitgalos b'shaveh. Not all these aspects in anything that are going to be equally readily apparent. Ki yesh bechinos niglot u'mesugot miyad hayidei achushim. There's certain things, there's certain aspects of a thing like this table which are apparent and can be conceived immediately because from our senses, like the color of the table, the width of the table, the height of the table. V'yesh mit'almot yoter. And there are certain aspects that are going to be more hidden. Shetzrichim v'hishtadlus la'amod aleihem. We'll have to work very hard to find those aspects. V'nimsa atzmam. Excuse me. So that's one problem. The problem is there's many aspects. The other problem is not all the aspects are readily available to our senses. The third thing, what makes things more complicated is that if we look at tables of different objects, so they are all variable. They all start looking different one to the other. We have a general abstract idea of what's called a table. When we start talking about specific tables, then we have problems because they come in various shapes, sizes, and forms, so we're going to have to take that into consideration. Excuse me, that's not correct. He says, no, excuse me. He says that the same bechina which exists in one object, which is very obvious, could be hidden in another object. Derech mashal, he says, for instance, Tashmisho ashulchan nigla lakol. If I ask you what a table's, what's the use of a table, everyone knows what it is. It's obvious, okay? Shehil l'suma la v'chilas ochlen v'kelim. It's to put food and objects on their surface. Tashmisho lechem, the use of lechem, kamochen, is also obvious. Shehu lechilas adam. Quite obvious. It's a food for man. Ach, tashmisho asavim, when it comes to herbs, their use is rabim, asfei haaretz, as many different herbs there are. Lo yadu el acher hishtadlus gedola. You won't know them unless you really study them very carefully. In the end, you do if you ever discover all. You may never even discover. Conclusion: Nimsa she'ein kol nimsa megala kol bechinos shebashkaf aleim tusaka mitatam. So it seems that we see here, it's very obvious that all of objects in reality are not going to give up their truthful nature in all their aspects just by casual observation. Okay. Vizulat kol zeh, besides this, Hine hanisayon eid neman. We have a proof from reality. Min hatayuot mitzuriyot b'lev rabim mebnei adam lamitam behem chazakim behem v'munasam behem v'lo yeru behem shek klal. He says that that's the problem. The first problem we spoke about is the problem of external reality. External reality, the problem is we have a lot of different aspects to things. They're all true. Some aspects are more apparent than the other. But there's another problem with the human being himself. That's the person who is trying, the observer. His problem is that we know that it's true that a person can believe something to be true very, very powerfully and not see any sheker in it at all, any falseness. Ukva yikoreh la'adam echad atzmo sheyachashev b'techila inyan mina inyanim emet ubora. Maybe it happened to us, to a person, one of us, that we saw something, we thought it was clear and true. V'achar kach yimseihu kozev, then later on you discover it's false. V'yeshuv mimenu, and you leave it. In other words, a lot of times we believe things, and because we haven't investigated them carefully, we don't see any sheker in it. We see no falseness in it. It's only after we do a deep analysis that we understand that, hey, wait a minute, this idea that I believed really was not correct at all. So that's another problem. It's a problem with the way that the human being handles information. They've learned, actually, psychologically, that people like to give answers right away to problems. They don't like to actually sit with a problem. And the problem is when you give a quick answer, it's not always the truth, but you may think it's the truth. So that's a problem with people themselves. We're going to have to handle our internal nature, slow ourselves down, and make some sort of checklists here to make sure that we're not jumping to hasty conclusions. Okay?
So how does that work with his first paragraph was that a person has a natural inclination to truth, but they can misuse that. It comes out from this because they don't have enough information.
That's correct. Or it's called jumping to hasty conclusions. With a little bit of information, they start jumping to conclusions, and that's dangerous. Okay, so you desire truth. The problem is, are you willing to put in the energy and the effort to actually discover it? Okay, not because the topic that you're dealing with may be complex, but you yourself may be jumping to hasty conclusions. So he's going to try to slow us down and give us this checklist, this toolbox of methods to be able to more accurately handle reality, and also to slow ourselves down and check ourselves out to make sure that we're not jumping to hasty conclusions. Okay? Again, any questions? Okay. All right. So he says like this, in Cain, therefore, since we have these problems in observing and handling our own ability to fathom the truth, so we can see very clearly that reality is not revealed and clear. Aval yesh litos makom, there's a place to make mistakes. She'efsha l'sheker sheyeh ro'eh emes. It's possible that sheker can appear true to us. Ve'ein koch ha'seichel chazak kol kach sheyikaleh el ha'emes. And the seichel is not so strong that it's going to hit the target of truth immediately, below yachtia, not stray. It's possible that the seichel will slide and make errors without even being aware that the errors are being made. Since that's true, vadai she'ru'i hu she'motze lo hadracha v'limud shebehen yikazek v'nesiv ha'yosha lebilti nitos mimenu. He says, so since that's true, it's imperative that we should find a method in order for us to strengthen ourselves on the path of the straight path of truth, and make sure that we're not swerving from it. The imira elo she'etzeh kilo nishma, and if it does happen that we're a little not careful and we go off the path of truth, keshiyashkiv heitev yakir es tauso. When we look at it again, what we're trying to investigate a little more carefully, we'll be able to recognize our errors. V'yedal eshuv el hamasilim. We're able to get back onto the path of truth. Okay? The amnan klal hadracha. What is the basic framework of this type of method? Hu kibbutz kol bechinos. he's going to have to gather together all the various aspects, the general aspects that all reality share, and explain how they work and their laws, according to the truth of the reality. And once we have these rules, then there'll be eyes for our intellect that will keep us on the path of emes, and we won't swerve from it. He makes a comparison. He says this study is comparable to what Shlomo Melech did. She'also as Naim l'Torah. He made handles for the Torah. The Gemara in Eruvin. What does it mean, handles for the Torah? V'hainu ki al yedei klalim ketzarim uma'atim, by the way of a few general principles, Misudar and Kogan, properly organized. Hine yelakach shiur godol min hachachma al nekala. We'll be able to take a large measure of wisdom very, very easily. Okay? Va'al tichshov shiyu klalim ha'elu inyanim amukim ma'od rechokim yidiyas hamon amoshim. Don't think what I'm about to teach you here, these general rules, they're so deep and they're so far from the common person's mind. He says it's not true at all. Ki einam ela inyanim kalim v'niglim mode. They're very, very simple rules, and they're obvious. They're very, very obvious. V'lo nosaf behem ela haro v'sidur. All I did was I'm going to bring your awareness to them, and I'm going to organize them in a very Mesudar package. Kikfar kulam yimsu b'chok haskala v'teva. All these processes of thinking and of analysis that I'm going to talk about, I have a very exciting thing to tell you. They're all there already set up in your mind. But what's the problem? Ella sha'ad shelo yit'areh aleihem adam v'lo yiyu mesudarim v'aruchim etzlo lo yazu klal. When a person is not aware of the thinking process, not made aware of it, and they're not organized properly in his head, so then it doesn't help him. It's there, but it doesn't help him. It's a confusing jumble of ideas. However, when these principles are properly arranged in front of him, they'll be able to be handles to hold up the great conceptual ideas that we have to carry, and we'll be able to carry them easily. Like I wrote above. What he's saying here is a tremendous statement. He said he's going to now present us with the basic tools of intellectual understanding, and we'll check ourselves out to see whether we're on a path of emes or not. V'hinei v'ra'oti gadol to'ela zeh ha'inyan v'rov hatzarech bo. Since I saw the great need, or advantage, the great gain of this thing, and how much it's so needed, I was aroused to write this little composition. It's going to help if you know this little book, not only to, if you use it properly, to improve your own learning, but you'll also improve your teaching. But it's with one condition. With Tanai, on the one condition. Shelo you be'ena v'devorim kalim. Don't think that these things are so easy and that I don't have to consider them at all. Kamoshu hakol misheino mavin, like anyone who doesn't really understand. In other words, don't take these things lightly. Don't just, oh yeah, I got the idea, let's go. You have to sit on them, you have to consider them. Ella yidaktek behem, be very, very careful with my words and my rules. Yishtadel la'amod alehem, and try to master the principles. Ki lo hanachti miladaktek midivarai l'shum ha'inyanim b'veru ha'efshari kafi dati. Because I have not relaxed in my efforts to be exacting in all the words that I'm speaking about, all the topics, to explain everything the best of my ability. You know, the Vilna Gaon, when he read Mesil Shishar, he said he could not find an extra word in the first 3 paragraphs. The Ramchal is not only a master of information, but he's a master of communication. So he warns us that although these things, on one hand, don't think that these ideas are so abstract that you have to be Einstein to learn them. On the other hand, don't think that they're so light that, oh, I understand this and I can go on to it. You have to really consider what he has to say. Okay? But V'hayata kamanati bo l'sader l'varer ba'ofen ha'yoter katzar u'maspi darkei hisbonenus v'haskala. It's my intention here to organize in the briefest and most sufficient way all the ways of investigation and intellectual understanding. Lahakir et ha'emet u'lekorabo, so we'll be able to recognize truth and bring it close to us. Ve'et ha'sheker u'lahachiko, and to push away, and to recognize what shekers and to push it away. Ubihiyot zeh hayam agadol v'rachav yadayim yam ha'talmud orach lefneinu. And since we have this sea, this great sea, expansive sea of the Talmud, the Yam HaTalmud that's arranged before us, Adire Mishpere Populav, mighty are the breaking waves of its pilpul, of its argumentation. Vagale Hilchasav Yalu Shamayim V'Yordu Tahomos. The waves of its halachas reach to the heavens and plummet to the depths of the universe. Halichas Abderachena, that's its way. Pneihem Levarer Laben Amita Shotara. This tremendous interaction is all coming to clarify the truth of the Torah. Derech HaKodesh Korala. This is called Derech HaKodesh. The give and take in the Gemara, the debate, the back and forth, he calls it Derech HaKodesh. It's not a b'diavad. It's not something that the Chachamim did a long time ago. It's actually a Derech HaKodesh, understanding how to melaben, to clarify and to discover the truth is exactly what the Gemara is about, and that's called Derech HaKodesh. L'man yatzliach, in order that I, the Ramchal, should be successful, the Eida ki lo yamut, and I'll know that what I'm saying is not going to be a passing fancy. I'm going to make the basis of my study based on the it's going to be a binyanav, it's going to be a foundation for all types of study. In other words, what I'm going to do is I'm going to analyze, says the Ramchal, this great process of debate in the Gemara, and I'm going to use that method to be able to study everything that I come in contact with. V'hinei nishtadalti levar yesodos hapilpul hayosha v'shorashei hamasav hamatan shel hashas. I try to explain the basic principles of the argumentation, the straight argumentation, and the give and take of the Shas, b'chol chelkein, in all its different parts. Shiyoya l'mi shelo yigia dayan liyadiyas limud hashas. It's going to help people who have not yet reached the level of understanding how the learning process works in Shas. And they want to enter into it in a straight way, in an easy way. When they use this little book that I'm writing as an introduction, the way that the halachas are presented now will be totally laid out expansively in front of them, very easily. They'll be able to see the halachas in a straight way without any detours. Things that would have taken a long time to acquire. Tremendous amount of energy, strength. The Omel Gadol, big, a lot of work. What will happen? You'll be able to acquire the information in a short amount of time with the minimum amount of effort. Because my method of deciding, organizing the basic process of learning and all their various subcategories is going to help you tremendously. And even someone who already is acquainted with the methods of Shas, it'll also help him sometimes to save himself from making an error. V'hine karati shemo kafi and therefore I called the name of this book according to its subject matter, derech tfunos, the way of understanding. Kel hanosen ladas tbuna, may Hashem who gives understanding, yechanenu deya dina v'askel, please grace us with knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. Li yera oto ulasos ritzono lavdo b'leilo shalem, in order to fear him and to do his will and to serve him with a complete heart. That's Exalah forever, ve'ed amen ken yiratzah. So the result of this whole study of discovering the truth is capsulized in the last line. Because, as I said before, what we want to do is Hashem's will. But we want to make sure that we understand what he's saying clearly and not falling into error. And because it's so easy to fall into error, the Ramchal has gathered together these basic principles, and if we understand them, he guarantees us that we'll be able to understand the learning process and learn much quicker and easier than we could have done by just simply trying to do it ourselves. Okay? So that's the introduction. Any questions from the vast audience out there?
No, the introduction was pretty straightforward. But based on the introduction, it sounds like everything else needs a little bit of thought and analysis, right?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that too well. Just a little.
Sounds like that everything else, once he gets deeper into it, based on the chart, though, it looks like it needs some thought, and this was pretty straightforward, the introduction.
Right.
Okay. You know what I found? I found this many Yankee Horowitz. I found this with many topics like this. It's usually, we do with. I run a mentoring program for teenagers, for adults to mentor teenagers. What we do is we do some training, and then we bring them back and train them again once they started mentoring. Because it's very abstract, and then when you're in the field, the training helps more. I found very often when you go back and read a Hakdama like this, once you get your hands in it, it's extremely helpful. It's you know, you understand it on a different level.
Right.
Okay. Any other comments, questions, observations? Okay. We're going to go into the meat of the matter. I don't know how much time we have here. I'm keeping track of the time. How are we doing, Avi? It's 7:04. It's an hour. I mean, I'm willing to go a little further, or we can just stop here, and next week we can go start getting into the meat of things. Up to you.
Yankee, where are you up to? You want to?
I think we're at a. I mean, with that, we usually plan for an hour. I think we're like at a perfect spot. I think we should just start next week and start the.
Right. Let's start the next thing. Okay.
Right. Okay. We're going to get. That was the introduction. We're going to get into the meat of things, and what I'll try to do is to give you live. Just keeping this actually. He gives examples in the Gemara, but I'd like you to participate and. I'll try to give you live examples so that the Sefer comes alive and just doesn't start getting so abstract that we lose contact with the material on the ground, okay? There's things here that once you understand them will clarify your learning to a tremendous extent. He said it, and it's very, very true. So we should just have a bracha tzlacha. We'll see you guys at the show next week. And thank you for tuning in. I don't know what we say, but have a good. Oh, you guys, it's the Shavua Tov. With me, it's the morning here. But
thank you very much.